Thoughts from a spinster. So that is the name of the next two video diaries that I'm about to share. No idea what I said at that time. This was months before I launched the Blueprint Breakers podcast, years before launching Your Gen X Big Sister. So it'll be interesting to hear whatever it is I had to say. I split it up into two parts, so I must have had a lot to say. So anyway, let's take a look at the first one. Hello, everyone. It's Amy coming at you live from Seagirt Beach in New Jersey. Beautiful day for the beach. Not crowded at all. Love being here in the middle of the week. Really nice. Really easy to find parking. Not a lot of people around. Absolutely beautiful. So my entry for today, I'd like to talk about a specific demographic of women, my own demographic, because I've been giving a lot of thought to this over my sabbatical, and it is sort of shaping the direction that I want to go. First of all, it's my specific demographic that has allowed me to be able to take this sabbatical this summer. Most women with other responsibilities and obligations and things like that would not have the freedom to do what I've been able to do this summer. And I am very much aware of that fact, of that privilege, of that luxury. My demographic of women, over 40, over 50, over 40 and 50, not married. In my case, never married, but there's a lot of women in my age range not currently married, but have been married or widowed. Side note, sometimes I think of myself as widowed. In my head a little bit. Sometimes it feels that way. Anyway, demographic, not married, over 40, 50, no kids, identify as a woman. So that's my particular category, and heterosexual. And what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing is my particular demographic is growing. It's probably the largest that it's ever been at any point in history in this country. I've started to do some research on it, and I'm struggling with really finding the data that I need, but definitely more than we've had. Although I've read something that actually said it's a repeat of a trend from about 300 years ago in England, but that's, again, a side note. I think my theory is what's leading to this growing segment of our population is the implementation of birth control and Roe v. Wade, so reproductive rights, that happened in the 60s. As well as women entering the workforce and women graduating from college more than ever. And while I know women still make 70-something cents on the dollar, there's a lot of us that have broken past that. So we have more earning ability and financial means, and so that gives us freedom. And that has meant that we haven't had to legally tie ourselves to a partner, and we've had more choices on motherhood. So I that's my theory on why there's more of us than ever before, or I feel like there is. I still don't have exact proof backing that up. The other thing that I'm not really discovering, I've known this for a while, but it's become more acute in recent years as I've started to look for support and resources about all of the changes that I've been facing in my menopausal years, which I entered that phase at about 51-ish. I have found a lack of resources and information for women in my specific position, in terms of coming, not just the physical hormonal stuff, but the whole person. What does it mean to be aging? What does it mean to be preparing for retirement? What does it mean to, like, what is up next for your next phase of life? How do you address your current phase of life? Like, when you look at the wheel of life, if you've seen, like, there's a lot of different versions of it, but it covers things like family and health and finances and, like, romance or relationships, spirituality, like the different categories of life. When you look at the wheel of life for women in my specific demographic, it is distinctly different from the wheel of life of women who are married or partnered, and women who have kids, whether partnered or not. It's a very different thing, different priorities, different needs, different struggles, different worries, different fears, very specific. And in my search, I have found a lot of information and support for midlife women, or women going through menopause, or women preparing for retirement. But a lot of the content assumes that you have kids, and or assumes that you either currently have a partner or you're divorced or something like that. So the content, like, sometimes it'll start to resonate with me, and then it goes in a direction, and it's like, oh well, that's not me. So it never quite hits exactly. And I'm finding, like, as I've been putting out this vlog during this sabbatical and talking about the journey and the things that I've been thinking about and the things that have been happening since the beginning of June for me, a lot of people have reached out, of all different demographics. The loudest have been the ones that are in my specific demographic. Don't have a good name for that demographic. Historically, they've been called spinsters. Then I found out spinsters was for unmarried women between the ages of 23 and 26. And then over 26, they were called thornbacks, which is supposedly like an even worse insult. Old maid, cat lady, so there's a lot of derogatory terms for women in this demographic. I am bound and determined to find one that I can embrace. Yes, I know we don't need to have labels, but I think sometimes you can benefit from having a positive label that can bond you with other humans. So I'm bound and determined. So anyway, no positive term for this demographic. And I lost my train of thought. So I'm on a mission to figure out what is it that we need. How do we want to be heard, need to be heard, etc. Ooh, 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 ooh. So, all right. So I can see how things started to come together for me in terms of what my mission was going to be. If this was in July, I think, yeah, this is the end of July that this was done. My podcast launched in October, so I could see that I was working on that at this point. I love that I opened up with like the benefits of the demographic of being over 40, single, no kids. And I pointed out the fact that I wouldn't be able to be doing what I was doing if I wasn't those things, because I just have more freedom and I have no dependence and all that kind of stuff. So I love that I called that out in the beginning. Interesting that I referenced feeling like a widow. I don't I don't ne- I don't necessarily identify that way. I had a loved one, a fiance, who passed away at a very young age. We were in our late 20s. And that was very, very traumatic and life-changing for me. My whole life has been like, it was one of those points, you know how you have those life experiences where it like cuts everything before versus after that experience. So I'm wondering if I was kind of referencing that experience a little bit and feeling like, I did have a marriage and I did have a loss like that. So I'm wondering if that's why I was referencing that label. But that's a topic for another day. The data about un, unmarried women, especially never married, no kids over a certain age, it is still virtually impossible to find the data. You can find it cut up into pieces. Like in terms of, I just wanted to know what percentage of women in America right now are over 40, never been married, have no kids, or even over 40 single, have no kids, and then have some breakdown of the types of single, into divorce and widowed and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't, there's nothing that covers all of those. They'll look at percentage of unmarried single, and they'll look at how many don't have children. I mean, I think last I looked, it was like 1 in 4 or 5 of us, women over 40, do not have children. And it was much higher than that are single, but nothing that combines it together all as one. So that's still interesting. I also think it's interesting that I was talking about, you can also see in here in this video the early seeds of talking about pretirement. This was 4 years ago, friends. So for those of you who are trying to figure out what your next thing is and what you're going to do next, it's not a quick, it's not a flip switch kind of a thing. It's a gradual thing. And I hadn't even realized that that portion of my mission and that portion of my focus even kind of stretched back that far. But you could hear that when I was talking about phase of life and what's next, and talking about like there not being resources. That's what really inspired the start of my podcast. So, talking about how like the resources that were out there talk to mainstream women, the majority of women. And I didn't qualify as being part of the majority of women. So a lot of what was there for me didn't fully apply, just like I said in that video, which was why I was trying to do that. I decided I was going to do that and bring experts and focus in on our demographic and have them speak to us, which I have successfully done over these last few years since I launched the podcast. Find it interesting, I talked about Wheel of Life because the Wheel of Life and the fact that the Wheel of Life doesn't apply to me in the same way that it does like a more mainstream woman, our categories would be different. All of that has carried over. It is part of the Permission to Pause course, how to design your pretirement. I've incorporated the Wheel of Life in there, and I've incorporated customizing and designing your own that fits you. So the early birth of that obviously was already taking place. The whole thing about names for our demographic, that cracks me up. There's still no good names for our demographic. And I did try to create my own. When I When I finally decided to launch my podcast and I was coming up with a name for it, it was about trying to come up with a positive name for our demographic. What I came up with was modern elder woman. Modern elder woman. And if you look back in my podcast, you'll see the first chunk, couple dozen episodes are under the modern. You can still find them under the Blueprint Breakers name, but the episodes in the beginning are under the Modern Elder Woman name. So I was trying to claim the word elder woman and put a unique spin on it by calling it modern. And there was pushback on the name. I got a lot of like blah kind of response that people did not like elder being in their label at all. So that's when, like, within the podcast, I talked about blueprint breakers, and the blueprint breakers were us. We were the ones breaking the blueprints, not doing things as we had been told or as we were, quote, supposed to. So that's when Blueprint Breakers was born, and that's why I changed the name of the podcast to Blueprint Breakers. And the ironic part about that is that I even in that case, even though it was my mission and I was trying to serve my demographic, I still was unable to let my demographic fully own the title. Because in the beginning, Blueprint Breaker was a woman over 45 who did not have a partner and did not have kids, or did not have kids. Like, that was what it was. And which was great. And I got great response to that from other women in my same situation. Over time, after many months, after a year, 2 years, and my podcast was like going along, and it wasn't growing. It had a audience that kind of stayed the same size. It wasn't until I started expanding the definition to include anyone who's living a life outside the traditional norms, and however you interpret that, which then became a lot more. It wasn't until I did that I started to gain more momentum. And it wasn't until I just specifically spoke to our generation, Gen X women, that I really started to get some positive traction on my channels. And it speaking to all Gen X women, not just those of us who have not been married and don't have kids. So I find it interesting that I still haven't been able to help create a positive label for my very specific demographic, which is a minority, but I don't know how much of a minority. And I don't know how big it is compared to other minorities because I can't get the data on it. But I know that it's growing. That I know. I have individual reports that kind of show it's growing, but no label yet that we can own for ourselves. Anyway, interesting to see this old video diary, to see how it all came together and how things then gave birth to what became Blueprint Breakers. Let's take a look at day 58. So that was day 57 of my sabbatical. Day 58, Thoughts from a Spinster Part 2. Yeah, I'm just gonna claim spinster. Anyway, okay, here we go. Hello, it's Amy coming at you live from downtown Millburn, New Jersey. I'm actually sitting in this nice little picnic park area that I just stumbled across. I'll show it to you real quick where I am. I'm directly across from Rock and Joe, where I have spent the last couple of hours getting some work done, and I just found this nice little peaceful green area, and I thought perfect place to sit and chat for a second. I wanted to continue my conversation from yesterday because I lost my train of thought and tried to pause the video, but it actually ended the video. And so I remembered what I wanted to say. So I was talking about my demographic of women and how historically we've been referred to as spinsters and how there's no positive term. But I also started the video mentioning that if it wasn't for my specific demographic, I wouldn't have the privilege, luxury, ability to be able to take the summer off in quite this way and sort of really take the space to rest and reflect and heal and learn and all of that. So within the short span of the last video, I talked about definitely some of the highlights and best parts, and also some of the lowlights and worst parts. I wanted to mention that I was having a conversation with my brother the other day, my brother and my sister-in-law, and we were talking about this subject just a little bit, and my sister-in-law was telling me how incredibly lucky I am to be able to do all this, and also that my child-free status has really afforded me so many freedoms that she wanted to make sure, understandably so, she wanted to make sure that I really understood the freedoms and the benefits that I've received from living a child-free life. And I get it, and I understand, and I agree. At the same time, I think, because I can't remember if she mentioned it or somebody else mentioned something about how, anybody would love to be able to have that. They would trade places with you in a second. They'd love to have that opportunity. Okay. I think, and I don't have any proof behind this is just a general feel of how people interact with me and things they say or do or whatever. I think it's 25% envy. There's 25% of their overall thoughts and feelings that envies my position, and there's about 75% pity that feel bad for me and my position, and my particular situation, and women like me. They pity that I don't have a partner, and they pity that I am not a mother. And this adds a really complicated layer for me. This is another big lesson. I am trying to not be affected by what I perceive as the pity of others. I'm not sure how to do that yet, but I'm trying. I don't want to be pitied. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. I've mentioned in a previous video, I've wanted people to be impressed by me and look up to me and consider me a role model. Those are all also ego driven, so I'm working through those as well. But it is something that women in my demographic struggle with, and the other pieces to it varies how much we struggle with it. Obviously, we're all individuals, but it also depends on if it's been by choice or by circumstance. Am I without a partner by choice or circumstance? Am I not a mother, or child-free or childless, or however you want to call it, because of choice or circumstance? For me personally, it's been a little bit of both. Obviously, choices I've made throughout my life led to certain circumstances, but it was not and has not been my deliberate choice and decision. I didn't enter my adulthood thinking, I want to remain single, I want to remain on my own, I don't want to have children. That was not a conscious choice or decision that I made at any point in my adulthood. And then the mother decision was made for me at a certain point. So as I talked about the needs and the struggles and the challenges and the obstacles that women in my demographic are faced with, there's a lot of grief and pain that needs to be addressed and healed and dealt with. Not saying that women in other demographics, married women, women with kids, that they don't also have pain and grief and trauma. I totally understand that. Ours is just very specific. And for example, when I talked about just the health and medical pieces around menopause, there's a huge amount of grief attached to it as well, in saying goodbye to your reproductive years. I know friends of mine who have had children that still grieved over losing their ability to have children. And I think it's just acutely different for those of us that didn't have children that would have liked to. So that's just a specific example. So I wanted to add on to the part one because I wanted to further articulate just some of the perspectives and obstacles and hurdles that we need to overcome. I am workshopping some positive names for women like myself. I think I find one and then I play around it in my head. And I'm like, nah, I don't really like that either. So if any of you have any ideas, a good name for a woman of a certain age, over 40 or 50, who is single or not partnered and does not have children, is there a good, powerful, positive, more like optimistic, hopeful, happy kind of a name for us? If you've got any ideas, please send them my way, because it's just the beginning of what I'm working on for this particular community. Hope you're all well, and if you are in my demographic, hello, I see you, reach out, love to hear from you. If you are not, obviously we still have commonalities because of shared human condition. So please continue to follow along. But if you know any women who fall into that specific category, please share my vlog with them, amyapalmer.blog. When you go to that link, you can click the follow button, enter your email address, and you get notified when new posts happen. I'd love to find more and more and more of this community. Have a great day, everybody. Stay cool. Bye. Wow. So I've spent a few years talking on these very topics that I highlighted here, like the talk about grief over not being a mother. I don't identify as child free. I identify as childless, not by choice, and it's by circumstance. And like I said, some of my choices led to circumstances, but I never intentionally chose singlehood and not being a mother. It was never an intentional choice. And I talk about some of those. In fact, I was interviewed on a program a couple months ago for Menowell, where I talked about menopause and how it specifically hits women who've never had children. Grief. For me, it was grief that I thought that I had dealt with. I thought that I had healed from it. I thought that I had mostly come to peace with it. I mean, it would occasionally bubble up, as grief does, but I was not prepared for the smack in the face it gave me when menopause finally came in. That final closing of that door, slamming of that door, hurt, and nobody was talking about it. And still, when we have menopause conversations, even when we talk about the emotional side of menopause and the hormonal side of menopause and what it, the whole feeling of becoming invisible and all of those emotions that come with it, nobody really partners that up with the grief over not being a mother. I still don't see a lot talking about that, but I do think it's an important conversation to have. I feel like I've healed tremendously since this video was taken, and I think my healing came from talking and sharing my story and continuously sharing my story. So I'm just very grateful that I've had the opportunity to do that. And it's really gone a long way to really a lot of healing. And like I said, I mean, the grief still shows up sometimes. Sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. But generally speaking, I am in a much better place than I was at the time of this original video. The thing about people saying, "Oh, you are so lucky you don't have," this is another reason why you're lucky that you don't have kids and you've got so much freedom and yada, yada, yada. That still happens. And it doesn't trigger me as it used to. It used to trigger me. Now I take notice of it and I am able to sort of bring it to their attention. It literally happened to me this week. A really good friend of mine said something. I don't even remember what she was talking about. And I don't know if it was reference to her own children or somebody else's children, but she wrapped it up with, see, that's why you really are so lucky that you don't have kids. And she has said that like quite often over time. Several people do. They'll say, "Oh, you don't know how lucky you are. You escaped this." Particularly when they're like going through something with their children, or when it's painful, and I have gotten to the point where I'm able to, like, my emotions are not triggered, but I am able to say, I just want you to know that it's not really helpful when you say that. I know intellectually, I know the benefits of not having kids, and I know the pros, I know the cons of not having kids, and I know the pros and cons of having kids, even though I haven't experienced it. Like, I know all that. It's not helpful when people try to remind me of that, and because it happens at times when I don't want to think about it, or don't need to think about it, and or don't need to connect it to whatever conversation that we're having. I don't and maybe I don't get triggered because I don't interpret it as pity so much anymore. I think because I've been more vocal about how I feel on the topic of not having children. I've been much more open and vocal these last 4 years than ever before. And I share my pain around it. I think people close to me, people who know me, people who love me, they don't want me to feel the pain. They have good intentions, and they're trying to reassure me. They're trying to remind me that it's not all sunshine and roses as a mother. Like, they're trying to alleviate and lessen my pain. They're trying to take my pain away, and they're trying to lessen my pain. So it comes from a better place. And so I don't necessarily see it as pity as much anymore as I did back then. Although, like, when I do have those types of things aimed in my direction, whether it's pity or, looking down on, or, like, especially online, getting blasted and any kind of negativity on that, I am able to kind of like remove myself from it, and it doesn't personally, affect me all that much. So that was interesting. I forgot that I had that perception of when I would experience people saying, "Oh, you're so lucky you're not a mother." And the whole conversation around intentional choice. So I'm glad I did this part 2 in this video diary. And I'm glad to see the ways that I have evolved. I'm glad to see the ways that we as a society have kind of evolved in these last 4 years. Yes, there's there's a lot of backlash, and there's a lot of the patriarchy desperately trying to pull us back. They would prefer that us spinsters they would prefer that us spinsters feel a lot of shame and misery, and they would prefer to publicly shame us because they don't want young women aspiring to be us, especially in some of the ways that young women today are doing while they're decentering men. They don't want this to seem like a preferable option. So that's why they're having like so much pushback. And I have all kinds of layered feelings about that. Yes, it is an option. And if you choose it as a life choice, more power to you. There's highs and lows, just like every single other path you could possibly take, right? We should just have all the paths open to us, all the options, and no shame around what you choose. For goodness sake. Anyway, thanks for watching these video diaries with me. I'll keep you posted how it's coming along. My name is Amy Palmer. I am your Gen X big sister, signing out.